Pahlavi is that he has never renounced the crimes of his father, who's, the Savak was committing brutal crimes and killing dissidents in prison. And that's the only place that he gets his, in a sense, his fame from, or his infamy from. So we don't want to go to another, from a mullah, supreme leader, to a king. What we want is a democratic republic. This is just, as an Iranian, I have to say this. But on the question, because I know there's a lot of Iranian...
But the Shah's son, Pahlavi, has been talking about the democracy and how he would reinstall a certain type of democracy inside of the... inside of the infrastructure. Maybe I don't think it's even a constitutional monarchy. He wants it's an actual democracy.
If we have the experience of Khomeini, when he was in the Chateau, when he was asked, what do you want as a system to replace the monarchy, he would always say, look, we want everybody to be free, but let's all decide on, the final outcome after the regime is overthrown. That was always his line. He would always say, once the regime is overthrown, then we all decide. But that was, it was a method that he used to not actually announce his vision. Once he came to power, he said, look, Velayat Paris, absolute rule of the supreme religious leader. So that's why we believe that, any force that wants to promote democracy should be very, very clear in outlining their agenda from beforehand and fully rejecting any form of monarchy. I have seen actually Reza Pahlavi speak in a number of interviews and being asked whether he will outright reject monarchy, but he's always said, let the people decide afterwards. So because of this previous experience of Khomeini, we don't want to see that repetition. But I want to just, because I know that a lot of Iranians are speaking, but for the international audience, I really want the people to know that, on the question of whether this ceasefire will hold and what will happen now going forward. To be honest, I don't think that the end will be any different under both scenarios, whether it holds or not. I think the world really has to get ready for the end of the mullah's regime in Iran. Because the regime just cannot get over this crisis. If I just let you know, for example, there was this huge uprising in 2022. Then last year, what has happened since then? The regime has lost Ibrahim Raisi, the president. It has lost Hezbollah. It has lost Assad, Syria, the regime is toppled there. And now it's lost the leadership of its Revolutionary Guards and its entire nuclear project. So it's extremely weak. And, added to this, last year they had the two elections in Iran, the parliamentary and presidential election. And even the regime state media announced in the parliamentary election in the capital, 7% turned out to vote. That was the official tally. So they have a credibility issue as well. So in this sense, when the regime has become so weak, Khamenei has no solution.
But what will flip? The question is here. They can change the model. They can put their head in the ground. We've seen it, for example, with Hezbollah in Lebanon when Maghniya was killed, and when other leaders were killed. Even leadership. Look at right now. Naim Qassem. Okay, he's weak and everything, but they seem to have. They are going to keep their political posturing and the political position, not in the same influence they had before, but they'll stay there. The need inside of Iran, which is the big problem. You guys don't have a democracy. You guys have a theocracy that's based on the mullah's regime, and whomever will come as the supreme leader next will do the same thing.
Yeah. So you're right that so far as the regime is concerned, they will do a lot of posturing. They will still say the same lines. But the problem for Khamenei or whoever comes after him is that right now, for example, Khamenei either has to continue the conflict. There's a ceasefire right now, albeit a wobbly ceasefire. But either he has to continue the conflict, and I think with the U.S. that has now entered this conflict, that the regime has been battered enough. They just don't have the strength to continue it. But if it doesn't, what happens then? So if it abides by the ceasefire, if it even agrees to come to the negotiating table and sign a nuclear deal, for example, well, what will the people inside Iran say? They will say, look, why didn't you agree to this deal before getting bombed and going to war and wasting $2 trillion on a nuclear project that has now just gone up in the air. The regime's own forces, they realize how badly they have lost. And there's an experience again, I draw the parallel to the Shah's regime. In the final days and months of the Shah, the Savak, the secret police, they refused to crack down on people like they were doing previously. The reason was they got the impression that the regime is in its dying days, and they were afraid that if I continue to crack down on the people, and then if there's an uprising and the regime is overthrown, they're going to come after me. So very quickly, there was a huge uprising, and the Shah was ousted. And so, because
but the situation right now on the ground is completely not the same. We've heard that the regime is already arresting people. They went back to their traditional. We've seen the parades in Tehran.
Exactly.
How long do you think it will take until you get an actual group of people that are ready for a revolution? Because there is no readiness for a revolution right now.
Well, to be honest, there's a lot of misinformation that comes from inside the regime. And one of it, I believe, is a myth. That they say there is no, support for the opposition, or there is no potential for change. I think the people of Iran are ready for change. They have shown that, and believe me, that the Iranian people are organized.
Hanif, the question is words. You are saying that they are organized. Okay, there is maybe 20% of the opposition that's with the son of the Shah, specifically the people that are outside. So Reza Pahlavi. You have another 20% between the Kurds and the Baluchistan movements that are not looking for as a separatist, that are not separatists. Baluchistan movement, the Sunnis, and the Kurds that want to stick inside Iran, keep Iran as a cohesive entity, but will fight. Those were the biggest fighter in the other revolution. You have 20% that are more of an opposition coming from the separatists, and then you have the rest. The last 40 are a combination between Persians and Arabs that have that Shia and non-Shia mentality. The youth, there is no cohesion.
Yeah, so I think you missed one, which is like the biggest opposition, and I think even those Iranians, who might not agree with, for example, everything that the MEK has espouses, but they agree that it's a huge opposition. That at least 90% of those 120,000 people who have been executed in Iran are stem from that, and all of them, they have families, and right now they have created what is known as the resistance units inside Iran. The regime itself has arrested about 3,600 of these resistance units since 2022, and they are in prison.
Talking about the leftists.
Well, if you want to classify them, if you want to classify them, they would be on the, I suppose, on the left wing. But
they were the ones that got here with the mullahs, and the mullahs took over instead of them.
Because you're right in the sense that at that time their leadership were in the prisons, the mullahs were out of the prisons, so Khomeini managed to, in a sense, hijack the revolution, in a sense, because there were a number of either leftist or Muslim opposition groups. There were the Fadain, the Mujahideen. The Fadain were actually bigger at the time. But
are you talking about Mujahideen?
I'm saying all of the various opposition groups that opposed the Shah at the time of the Shah's regime.
Have no legitimacy inside Iran. 2 to 5% support the maximum. 2 to 5%.
So
but
Jaleh, I believe that this is.
I want to go to Jaleh's questions on this because it's very important. And Nick, I think you're Iranian too, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I am.
Yes, cool. I want to go. I really would like to understand, because I come from a country that's quite close and that have the same complexity in terms of like division, in terms of opposition. I'm Lebanese. I want to understand in those elements and in those. I'll go to Nick and then Jaleh in that order. So Nick, in the opposition right now, okay, I gave the example of how it's divided. Who are the main protagonists, and how would they be able to work together to overthrow the regime, if the objective is to overthrow the regime?
Honestly, after so many years of seeing different groups and different leaders, I'm puzzled. I believe there are a number of people who are actually doing some work, but behind the scene, not to be uh, character assassinated by different groups, especially the uh, royalists who are attacking anyone that could seize the moment or state that what Pahlavi has done has not been helpful. So that's one thing. I believe there are a number of activists that are gathering and talking, like lawyers and a number of NGOs have helped create these councils. There was also a meeting in Prague in October. So there that some people have started working together. Like one individual that's not going to be a leader, but is trying to create a coalition is Ali Reza Akhundi, who is a member of parliament in Sweden. He's been effective in getting some people working together, but he doesn't want to be a leader himself. That's one thing. There are people like assisting individuals in Iran with give, giving them internet connection, like Mr. Mehdi Yahya Nejad in California. He's been able to succeed in getting some people Starlink technology inside the country, but that's a part of things. So we have a scattered um, space. We have all these puzzle parts of the puzzle that have not connected yet, but some people are trying to get them connected. I know that a number of environmental activists are trying to work to get a charter out shortly so people of Iran would understand that the water crisis and the environmental crisis and the energy crisis cannot continue and it will
Yeah, but
destroy
Nick,
the country.
that doesn't matter. Like, what I mean by it doesn't matter, it does matter in
Yeah,
the grand scheme of things. But when you're pushing, because I'm working also on a force, let's say, that would go against what's currently considered traditional inside of Lebanon, and in that work, our main targets, you need to set up targets, and the target today for the next 5 years is to, as Jaleh I think said, is to destructure the Iranian regime that has been in place for 40 years, change the infrastructure, change the people that are leading. Because even though tomorrow, let's say tomorrow, the leadership of the country falls and you get a different person that's in place, maybe a different democracy, the institutions are still controlled by the same people. So the transition needs to come from this before going to the situation of changing, of thinking about natural resources, of thinking about how to increase economy. The actual first steps, it's get in there.
I
And we're
understand.
not seeing that.
Oh, I totally understand. But considering what happened to many parts of the Middle East, let's say the Hasakeh governorate or parts of Iraq because of the water crisis and the empowerment of radical groups and what came next, there is a chance that this might happen to Iran as well in many parts. But the main thing that I want to express is that we need a change in the narrative of bringing down the regime. That telling people it can be possible, but it needs participation, and they're not supposed to wait for people outside of the country to lead because many people outside of the country have been out of touch. They have been out of the country for 20, 30, 40 something years, and they are not well connected inside the country with different communities. They're just repeating themselves. So I cannot tell you names, but there are people that are working together at this very moment, 24/7, to create a narrative and then announce it. But
Yeah,
my
hopefully.
apologies, I cannot mention their names.
I totally understand, because on our side it's the same thing. We fear assassination, not just character assassination when it comes to Lebanon, but
That's
actual
true. I've been on a
actual
list for a
assassination.
long time, so I know that. But
Yeah.
I just have to apologize. I have an appointment to go, and so I will lose the other conversations. Thanks for having
It's
me.
okay. Thank you so much, Nick, for being with us, and hopefully you can come back later for other spaces where we talk about this subject. Jaleh, you specifically about the same subject. So I know you support you're more in support of the Shah right now and his position, and you said that in the past you don't come from that environment. Do you think that there is other alternatives if the Shah is unable to unify the opposition?
I was always for the alliance, and when it happened, I was crying. I was so happy. So many people, both outside of the exiled opposition and inside Iran, were so happy for the first time since the regime came to power and slaughtered the opposition. Both Mujahideen Khalq, communists, different people. Also, of course, the Shah supporters. For the first time, there was unity, and it was so beautiful. It didn't work because there is a lot of intolerance within our culture, politically and also culturally. There is so much intolerance that there is so much. Oh, and I'm not saying that intolerance is not within the Pahlavi supporters. It is. There is a lot of intolerance within the team of the Pahlavi supporters as well. I see it all the time. They call everybody else, spies of the regime and so on. This is not the way to act. This is not the way to lead. We need unity, and we need to come together. And the Kurdish parties, the Baluchi parties, and I know that there are people working for that, but they're just the unity needs to come back. Where Pahlavi and Masih Ali-Nejad, those are the biggest, I think, if you want to say two biggest opposition leaders, Masih Ali-Nejad and Reza Pahlavi are the two biggest. And there are a lot of different, people around them that will, support. And if we can work together, it's just the fact that people are not willing to. They are always so busy thinking, oh, they will take all of the glory, they will take and oppress us. And no, we need to
Yeah,
understand that we
I
need to
understand.
trust each other. If in this process, we need to trust each other, or else we'll never win this fight
Yeah,
against these Islamists.
right now it's not the time to choose a leader, it's the time to unify and just
Yeah,
get
but we
the
have
thing
to
done.
have, opposition leaders telling people,
Yeah, but
organizing.
it can be multiple figures with
Yes,
one
it
plan,
should be. Of course, it should
which
be.
is get the system down, get elections, and then
Yeah.
the elections will decide who gets
Yes.
elected, and then you move forward.
Exactly. Exactly.
Uh,
I think
that
the very good thing to do now is to get people organized and stop being afraid of what the regime will say about the opposition. Fuck the regime. The whole opposition should come out openly and say what they're saying behind closed doors, that
yeah,
they're happy, that the Iranian people inside Iran are happy that Israel has been bombing the regime. Inside,
not
I
everyone. Again, I'm
not
gonna
not
repeat, not
everyone,
everyone.
but a lot of people. I've been on spaces where there have been like more leftist types of voices, not Pahlavi supporters, and even their people who like are from inside of Iran. When they
Yeah.
were like joining the
So
conversation, they were happy about it. They
I want to
trusted
try to
Israel.
go. I want to try to go to Mem. Sorry, I'm jumping a bit over the hands, but I'm trying to get all the Iranian voices in one go. Mem H, welcome on stage. I don't know if you've spoken already or not. Mem?
I guess you're asking me.
No,
So
no. It's
no.
Mem
Oh,
H. It's not. It's M Hussein, I think. M Husseidi. I don't think he's here. Hanif, Free Iran, ex, the second Hanif. Can you hear me?
Yes. Do you want me to give
Yes.
give me the mic?
Yeah, I want to give you the mic, and I want to hear
Sure.
your opinion about the subject we've been discussing. So
Yeah,
the
I was.
unification of the opposition. I see you've been in protests in Europe and everything.
Yeah, I was in fact following the discussion you had. It's quite interesting because the subject comes up, every time the regime gets weak and people are looking in a way that the regime is about to fall. So the question comes, what's next? And quite interestingly, I think we have to, because a lot of things have been mentioned about, the different groups, etc. But I think one has to look this in a bigger concept. We have to involve a little bit of history because first thing, I think we have had experience with two dictatorships already in Iran. We have the mullahs who are now ruling for 7 years, and then we had the Shah, 37 years something. So I think people are done with those type of models. So if we want to gather around a model, I think definitely that should be a democratic republic, and that everyone has a voice, whether he's been a son of a Shah or whatever, he can run for a presidential candidate or whatever, but then just as a normal citizen, not as a superior monarch, son, or whatever title they want to add to that. So I think that's one point. And then I heard the previous speaker who just left, I think, Nick, speaking about individuals who have been doing nice things, opposing the regime. But again, we are not fighting an easy regime. It's not like we're going to face a velvet revolution like we had in Eastern Europe in the case of Iran. We are going to have a very tough fight because this regime is quite well experienced. Khamenei has been in charge for 30-something years, 8 years before him, Khomeini. So altogether, the regime leadership has the 4 and 5 decades experience of repression. So being opposed to this regime is quite a tough thing. That's one should learn, And I mean, what can an individual do alone in front of this regime? Nothing really, because of just the mechanism, because they are in power and they have the forces. So then it comes to those who have forces. Now, one thing I have to say is that you don't see the forces from outside, and there are two reasons for that. Main one being the repression, because it would be very naive, I heard about percentage just before one of the speakers, it would be very naive to go and ask opinion of a people who've been repressed, who do you agree with? I mean, if they would say the wrong person, they would have had it, So it's quite, childish and naive to think of those terms that we are comparing in a democracy. Even in a democracy these days, you can't take the polls like we saw in the US. So let alone in the dictatorship in that of Iran, that, you try to find the figures based on, poll taking and asking opinion of people. So I think one thing people should realize, so how can we judge those who are opposing? I think the credibility comes from resisting and fighting the regime. So the forces who are fighting are not necessarily those you see on the social media because, they don't want their heads, to be on the gallows next day. So they are quite invisible. They are underground and they're clandestine, of course. But one thing that surprised the regime, I think, was in 2022 when the uprising broke out. Now, it was about a Kurdish young girl who usually these things happen every day in Iran, that the girl is hit and even killed, for not wearing a proper hijab, whatever. But this time it turned massive, and it was not even limited only to Kurdistan, but from north to south, they were repeating the same slogan over a few hours. So the regime realized, that this has got to be organized. I think that's where the force comes in. I think one of the previous speakers, Mr. Hanif, was saying about these resistance units. I think they're important to take into account, although they are not visible. But I can tell you why they're not visible. That's partly because of the repression inside Iran and the regime's propaganda. The other reason, I think, is because of a Western policy that has been going on for at least 3 decades, because the mullahs came with this smart idea back in the 90s, late 90s, that Khatami was there, that they should start this, hardliner moderate game and basically get agreements with the West with, with the financial, deals, etc. They have a lot of oil and gas. Of course, we have the second gas reserve in the world after Russia. We have the third oil reserve to some account. So probably one of the biggest fossil energy reserves in the world. And that's very lucrative and attractive for the Western nations. So it was an easy deal to, okay, well, we give you what you want, and we would, you have to clamp down and, harass and ban or in a way make invisible our opposition. And it began with blacklisting the main opposition at the time, the People's Mujahideen, or the MEK as they were called in the Farsi. And that continued for decades. They had to fight different courts, etc. But even though, that label is gone because they were never terrorists, they were proven right in the courts in Europe and United States. But the Western attitude hasn't changed. So what has happened is the appeasement policy that goes back 20-something years has made two things. Has enabled the regime to become arrogant, aggressive, and embolden them. In the meantime, it has made the West not seeing through the lies of the regime and not seeing the realities on the ground, because they don't get any television, because they don't get any top news channels, because they are an independent force. But you could see their actions through these campaigns that I mentioned. And also look at the regime's, if you look to the regime's propaganda, they say three things. They say death to Israel, deaf to United States, and deaf to MEK. And that's the only name that comes always. So if they were so insignificant and invisible, come on, the regimes are stupid to give them extra credit. So I think we can still talk as long as we want, but we have to let people inside Iran do the work. And I think it's better to focus on the model we
That's
want.
why
We want to
I
have a
think
republic.
that's why we're asking the question, right?
Sure.
That's the important part. I want to go to Rula just for a couple of minutes for in a change a bit of tone, and then I'll introduce the trap. Will take over. Rula, welcome on stage. I have a question in regards to a post you did. You are a fact check correspondent, and I want to fact check the post you did about Trump giving a red card to Netanyahu. It just made me laugh, so I wanted to I wanted
No,
to talk about.
it was just a joke because what happened the last 7 days was really a joke. You feel it was all orchestrated. Seriously.
So, what's your opinion about the ceasefire? Do you think it's gonna last, or do you think it's
Yeah, I
something
think
that
it's gonna
doesn't?
last, but the hypocrisy is this is the way I see it. Like, let's say, you remember when Gaza fight started, so everybody was helping to save Gaza, and the proxies, the Iranian proxies, helped to save Gaza. Nobody did anything, and they were all technically supported by Iran. Now, Iran didn't do anything until it got hit, directly hit. So they started. Okay, so now we're back to step zero. Okay, let's say there is a ceasefire and everything is okay, but uh, Gaza is still bombarded, right? So something does not make sense.
Yeah, I understand. It's like they gave up on Gaza and the situation in the Middle East.
Yeah, but I thought Iran had. Yeah, I thought Iran was there to save Gaza, but this is the hypocrisy I'm talking about. Like they didn't do anything; they just used their proxies, and when they were directly hit, this was the only time they tried to do something. So I guess this whole Middle East issue is just orchestrated for
Yeah.
advantages of certain countries.
Thank you, Rola. I'm gonna rotate out. Citrap will join my place. I just want to encourage people to ask questions in the comment. Most of the question that I asked the audience, especially about the Iranian situation, came from the audience, which is very important for us to share your opinion with those people. So thank you, and Citrap. Piotr, you had some points you wanted to raise before moving forward.
Yeah,
Thank you.
just wanted to um, update here from AFP that Iran's unprecedented strikes on the base were carefully calculated to provide an exit from the hostilities. That's according to quite a few analysts. I think we already know that, but I think it's worth reiterating that it was just that. Much of a sort of what's the right sort of strategic plan by the Iranians. I'm also seeing here from Emmanuel Fabian that the IDF Front Command has lifted restrictions on various areas as the ceasefire with Iran appears to hold. We are entering the next sort of couple of hours, which I think could be quite important because it's around about from here until 9:10 UK time that strikes have begun to be exchanged most frequently. So if we don't, and that was the point I was trying to make in the space earlier and yesterday, James, right, that if the strikes don't continue tonight from either side, then we can begin to hope that this ceasefire will actually last longer than just 24 hours. So it's the first 24 48 hours which can be the most critical. And just seeing here if there's anything else. No, that's everything for the time being. We've got a couple of hands up. Sitrep, you're with us. How are you doing? What's your thoughts on the ceasefire hold so far?
No, I mean, I think the ceasefire will hold. I do believe that President Trump, the conversation he had with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, really stopped a more severe Israeli retaliation that would have probably collapsed the ceasefire. I think Israel striking that radar star in the Caspian Sea was Israel saying, okay, we are going to respond to this, but we will honor the ceasefire. In a way, Israel can then say, last shot. a fairly probably minor military target. But I do believe it was, kind of President Trump was very forceful and vocal in ensuring that the ceasefire stays in place, which is kind of an interesting development. I mean, just we were talking about does President Trump now advocate regime change to now completely flipping on that and that, which is kind of an interesting dynamic when trying to analyze U.S. Foreign policy. But it does look like the ceasefire is going to hold. We are seeing in Tehran they're already having their victory parade, as to be expected, and but the IDF has already stated that they are now re-engaging their focus wholeheartedly now on Gaza. I believe there was an attack earlier today that had multiple IDF casualties in Israel because of that. And now, obviously, President Trump is heading over to NATO for the NATO summit, which we'll see a lot. I know there's a lot of back and forth with the Article 5. I wouldn't read too much into his standard Trump rhetoric about his displeasure. NATO has committed to increase defense spending. But so I think there's going to be a lot of that. And I think in the European side, there will be kind of more of this backing of how President Trump demanded the ceasefire. I think Europe is really happy with that. And then it did not expand to a regime change style operation. So, those are the interesting things. The other thing that I guess we have to look at is, okay, Israeli military operations in Gaza, that is not going to end anytime soon. Obviously, the Iranians are in no position to kind of make that demand. And kind of, I think it's important to highlight that prior to the ceasefire, when Israel probably conducted the most intense airstrikes on Tehran just before the ceasefire, and that day, yesterday, I mean, there has been significant casualties, but more casualties within IRGC leadership. Obviously, not enough to really threaten the regime, but it's still still a significant development. So, I think the region's in flux. Everything is kind of up in the air. The ceasefire, I do believe, will be held, but Israel is now reprioritizing their operations in Gaza. And I don't see that ending anytime soon. I think President Trump is more than happy to pivot away from the Middle East after Israel, Iran. We'll see if there's a further diplomatic push with Gaza. And obviously, the other major war to focus on is Russia, Ukraine. And that shows no signs of ending. If anything, Russia continues to escalate. They today conducted a massive missile strike against Dnipro with over 200 casualties, both fatalities, injuries reported. So that's another conflict that we're not going to see anytime ending soon. So it'll be interesting to see in the diplomatic side where President Trump and his cabinet reprioritize effort. That's up in the air right now.
Very good, mate. Thank you very much for that, my friend. I am inclined to agree. I think that the ceasefire is going to hold. I don't know. The strikes this morning really threw me off, but the comments that I read out earlier, for people who weren't aware, the IEA director of the UN has, emphasised that he's written a letter or contacted the foreign ministry in Iran about still engaging in the nuclear talks or whatever, monitoring of uranium enrichment. So there is hope that we'll sort of see some degree of, well, I don't want to say return to normal, but continuity, stability. I don't even know the word to use anymore, to be honest. Hani, you've had your hand up for you've had your hand up for a while. Let's go to you, Hazem and Ariel.
Sure. Just because regarding the ceasefire, I think whether it will hold, I think from the Iranian regime side, my personal take is that it will hold. And that's simply because they were the losing side in this war. Obviously, they lost much more. So definitely they will hold to that, while they can, to avoid losing more and try to reorganize and, restructure themselves, whatever. But ironically, I think, although the bombings killed many of the Guards' top commanders, which, Iranians hate these Revolutionary Guards, so they couldn't be happier than these people are, gone. But in the same time, the war creates an atmosphere of general fear in the society. So the point is that while we want this regime to go, the fact is that no social movements can really form or progress under, bombing, under aerial bombardments. So, but in the contrary, in the times of peace or even say ceasefire, social movements can, shape and start, moving, and soon people will be able to complain about perhaps their living conditions, electricity, power cuts, water shortage, etc., and that would turn up the temperature again in the society. I think that's ultimately where social movements can form and eventually, bring about, bigger protests that would shake the regime. And of course, seeing a much weaker regime and seeing a regime that is, going on its last legs, I think that encourages a lot of people to do so. I think definitely the best thing that could happen from my opinion, from the Iranian people's point of view, is exactly that this ceasefire would hold, that there would be a times of relative peace, and with the regime, much weaker than it was just 10, 12 days ago, there would be much bigger chance for any movement to move forward. And I think then we will just, watch and see, and hopefully, the change will come. So I think the eyes should be on the Iranian people, movement inside Iran, and we shouldn't really buy the Iranian regime propaganda. Of course, they would go for arrests, they would do this kind of things, they have done it, and they would try to, turn up the executions again, but executions itself has, can backlash, so the regime tries to find the balance. So all in all, much weaker regime and much bigger chance for the population, and much more need for Western, support for the people of Iran to fight themselves through, against the dictatorship towards democracy. That's just what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you for that, mate. Let's go to you, Hazem.
Hey guys, what a few hours. I never expected my president to drop the F word on national television, but that's where we are. We should bring him to a space one day. I think it'd be fun to talk to. Sitrap, I hope you're wrong about that Iran would be neglected, or the region would be neglected for in the immediate future. There's a lot of work that needs to be done right now. Israel and the United States at some point invested a lot in this war, politically and financially. There needs to be a return on this investment. I don't know what that would look like. France has already called for a conversation regarding the future of the nuclear program in Iran. And another interesting development that just popped up. So the Iranian president called the Saudi crown prince, and I would assume to thank him for Saudi taking I wouldn't call it a pro-Iran, a fully pro-Iran stance, but definitely more pro-Iran than we expected them to take at the beginning of this war. So the region is changing, and this was not a small feat, and this has changed a lot. Even if it doesn't look to be the case when you look at Iranian television or even Arabic television, but with that U.S. engagement, things will go back to where they were 2 weeks ago. And I don't think that's a good thing. It's not good for the Iranian people. It's not good for the people of Israel. It's not good for the people of the rest of the region between Iran and Israel. So I'm really hoping you're wrong. I really hope that President Trump will continue to engage. Maybe he can pick his words a bit more carefully, but we need continued engagement to make sure Iran doesn't go to Iran from 2 weeks ago. It tries to go underground again with their nuclear program. And tries to redevelop and replenish their ballistic missile stockpile, and continue funding terrorist organizations across the region. That's what we're hoping the end of this war will bring. And there's still a chance that can be worked on even now that we have an end of the war with a clear agreement that will change Iranian behavior. Thank you.
No, I mean, Hazem, my counter to that is I just don't see the appetite. I mean, look, Steve Woodcock obviously is going to be the person really in charge for this. We'll see more of a diplomatic. We'll probably see him continue trying to achieve a Gaza ceasefire, although that is very far fetched. And then we might see some push from the United States. I mean, we're already seeing rhetoric-wise that J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance, yesterday said, "Oh, this is an attempt to reset the region, this war, and it's going to give an opportunity for everlasting peace." I mean, we can all, agree or disagree with that statement. But I just don't see there's going to be that much of a diplomatic effort per se to get there. I do not see the U.S. re-engaging in very serious negotiation. And if it does, Hazem, then the only thing I can think of is a repeat of JCPOA. with the Islamic Republic. I mean, I think it's very hard to really see any other scenario where President Trump advocates for regime change, and we'll go back to a repeat of maybe the JCPOA. And if that, and I don't know if there's really a diplomatic appetite to go there right now, but time will tell. But clearly, President Trump is going to continue to say, "Well, I already destroyed the Iranian nuclear program. They're set back by years." So I can see them leveraging that as to say, "Okay, we're not going to really look into that issue," and then Israel will probably have to be more responsible. We'll see how Israel addresses it, because we've already seen Israel is capable of at least achieving some sort of, or not even some sort of, significant military success over Iranian airspace. So I think that might be delegated to Israel, and we'll see if there's any more significant diplomatic push. Time will tell. Hazem, I'll let you answer before we go to the other hands.
Yeah, real quick. JCPOA is not on the table because the components that made the JCPOA possible are no longer available to Iran. Would there be something similar? Probably not. I mean, if Iranians want to go back to anything nuclear, they will have to buy enriched uranium from the open market, or open-ish market. That's, I think, how President Trump will see it. Remember, people are paying attention in Washington, and anything that would appear remotely like JCPOA will bring plenty of criticism to President Trump. And there's still a chance for the Democrats to make a case that we didn't have to bomb the reactors. The war didn't have to even happen. President Trump could have just maintained the JCPOA or went back to JCPOA. And that's the point that the Iranians were trying to make, that they're ready for going back to the JCPOA, which is rejected obviously by President Trump and his party and the people and the Republican Party. So Trump needs to come up with something new for sure, and tougher than JCPOA, and that's otherwise nothing would happen. But what tools we still have? How do we maintain pressure on the Iranian regime at this point? All of these questions are still up in the air. Again, we've seen attempts to violate the ceasefire from day one. So my argument is the regime behavior has definitely not changed. Just there hasn't been enough to change the behavior permanently. And we're going to wait and see what the Iranians do next. But I'm just, I don't know, me and myself and many others, I'm sure, on the space are not super excited about what's going to happen. We were probably a lot more excited 24 hours ago, hoping for Iran to come to a proper negotiating table and sign something more iconic and more that holds them, that hold their feet to the fire. More than President Trump tweeting when caps at everybody. That's it on my end.
All
Peter,
right.
I joined late, so I don't know who was next on the hands.
No,
I'll defer to
yeah.
you.
The space is surprisingly glitchy. Nothing compared to what we had last night, Sitrad. But we have, let me see here, Hanif, Ariel. I see you up, and then I think we're going to check on the news as well. I'm seeing a few trickles here and there, but I have a question for you as well, Sitrad. So, Hanif.
Yeah. So thank you again. Hassan just asked, what if I understood correctly, what should in a sense, the global community do at this point, in addition to everything else that they've done? I think the one thing that they could do is to show moral and political support to the opposition and to recognize the right of the resistance units inside Iran to stand against this religious dictatorship or religious fascism that exists inside Iran. And I think one of the speakers mentioned already, this issue of unity, there should be unity among the Iranian opposition groups once this regime is overthrown or even in advance. So, of course, I agree with the issue of that there should be unity. But one thing that, because, again, we've had the experience of Khomeini taking over from the Shah, while we do want to be unified, but we should be unified around the issue of democracy or a republic, rather than any form of dictatorship or or some form of whether it's like a monarchical dictatorship or a religious dictatorship or any other kind of dictatorship. So unity is important, but we should be standing against any possible threats to the future democracy. The other point is that there was a discussion on the issue of intolerance that exists in the Iranian opposition, and I would like to actually vouch for that, because I'm always under attack. I tweet and things like that, but by a lot of those people affiliated, at least on their tweet, they say that they're affiliated to the Shah's son or whatever, and they're always like swearing at me or threatening that I should be killed. And sometimes I get the impression that some of them are actually working for the Iranian intelligence ministry, the mullah's intelligence ministry. But in any case, that's I agree to tolerate that, just because I put myself in the position of those Iranians inside Iran who are brave enough to stand against the regime, and they're being threatened with death in the prisons of places like Evin and other places. So this is the minimum price that we should pay. Just one last point I have is that there was the question about the fact that whether the Iranian resistance has universal support inside Iran or whatever. I just like to address that. The Iranian resistance, the MEK, it is never said that we have the support of like 95% of the population. They never say that. But the MEK is the only organized opposition movement which is nationwide, which has been active for more than 40 years to overthrow the regime. I know that, in fact, there are opposition groups which are organized, in the various provinces of Iran, like the Kurdish opposition groups. There are organized, ones among them, the Arabs, the Baluch, but there's also a national one as well. So what I think is that the international community should be supporting these resistance units who are working in all across Iran. When we say that there is a possibility of an organized uprising, you only have to look at the 2022 uprising. It took place in 280 different cities, and when you look at the chants in those protests by people of all different strata, the chants are identical. Like they're chanting "down with the oppressor, beat the Shah, or the supreme leader," or whatever. These kind of different chants that they were doing, but they're identical slogans coming out by teachers, by workers, by retirees, by truck drivers, bakers, women, students, all over. So it is clear that it is organized. And I think that, in addition to whatever the position that the US has, if they would like to cut a deal with the regime, they can cut a deal with the regime. If they would like to, take an aggressive posture, that's not entirely up to the US. But the one thing that is important to do is to recognize the right of the Iranian people and their democratic opposition to overthrow the regime themselves and establish a democratic system themselves, rather than any outside force, implementing their own agenda on Iran, whether it be a war, whether it be installing a puppet leader. That Iranians, of course, they will object to. But supporting the grassroots movement, that is something I think that everybody should be supporting. Thanks for it.
No worries, mate. Thank you very much for that. Ariel, all yours. Ariel, are you with us?
Yes, thank you. Yes. Thank you. I would like to mention the situation that you spoke about, especially with this ceasefire. Why it should last? Because firstly, Israel already finished all the initiatives, all the goals of the war that the war cabinet defined before the war even started. So this kind of a situation, like for us, it was the end. But before, before we closed the door, before we closed the light and went back home, the end of the day, they started to shoot on the United. They wanted to shoot on the United Emirates. The United States started to evacuate people. They were shooting at Qatar and all that. So and then they started to shoot on us again. So that was a bit of a situation. But in this kind of circumstances, Piotr, one might think, why should we mention the Palestinians? Why should we mention any conflict between the Iranian people and Israel that was supposed to be an ally to Iran? So this is very strange, and maybe this regime of I don't know who will be in the. We don't know who will take charge over there. Yes, and will be the leader of Iran in the next months. But we might hope that there will be some relationships, something proper. That the word peace is not it's not a bad word, sometimes it can be something useful for all of us. And not just with Israel. I'm not talking about Israel. I'm talking about all the neighbors of Iran. Look what's going on over there. If you are threatening Saudi Arabia, if you are threatening United Emirates, Bahrain, and Qatar and so on, this is not a good situation. It won't last. It is certainly going to escalate. So this is the one point that needs to be considered in as we say, take a step back and try to zoom out and watch what the administration inside Iran will, how they will operate, how will they behave to their own people and to their neighbors. And the second thing that I wanted to say, the second is about Palestinians. It's a bit not maybe not appropriate to mention that to the Iranians because Yasser Arafat and his fellows were killing and beating people inside Iran. So the last thing that the Iranians need is, and they don't support, they're actually chanting inside Iran, death to Palestine. Yes, this is what they're chanting over there. You won't get any kind of support from the real people inside Iran. The Iranians hate the Palestinians. Why? Because they were beating them because of the hair outside of the hijab. They were beating them. The same like the Lebanese, what they had with the Hezbollah and the Palestinians, with the Damour massacres, all the massacres that the Christians were facing back in the 70s and the 80s, the same thing happened inside Iran. So you won't get any kind of support from inside Iran. They hate Palestinians. They hate the Hezbollah because the Hezbollah was doing that too. So let's see. Let's see. Maybe this time this Khamenei regime and his fellows will start to work with his own people and stop bringing people from outside to beat the people inside Iran and to bring all kinds of Turkmenistanis, Armenians, all kinds of different kind of dynasties of whatever. Yes, to take the leadership over there. They need to start to work with their own people and stop killing them. Let's start with that. The normal, the normal
Yes,
administration.
absolutely.
If we can, yeah.
Peter,
Uh,
can I
Thank
just
you, Peter.
jump in with
yeah, let's go to you,
some
Ron.
news? Sorry, finally, so a little bit of news, but nothing, again, nothing earth-shattering. Again, this is from the Iranian parliament, not even just a member of the Iranian parliament. So always take it with a grain of, they're not an influential body within Iranian politics. But senior Iranian MP Aladdin Boujardi called for the suspension of Tehran's ties with the UN nuclear watchdog IAEA. Boujardi, a member of the National Security Committee, also called for IAEA chief Rafael Grossi to be barred from entering Iran. Again, just an MP, but some of the post reactions to some of the things related to the IAEA and how Iran is going to respond based on this latest round of violence that occurred between Israel and Iran. Back to you, Peter.
Yeah, well, I actually wanted to come back to you, mate, because I've got a question on, what you think we are going to see from this point, really. Because for me, the biggest question is still the potential for this uranium, this unaccounted uranium. Some people don't think it's Craig said he doesn't think it's too much of a worry. I feel like it still could be a big problem. The IEA is obviously carefully coming. Um, Oh, actually, sorry, there's an interesting update here from Lawrence Norman of the Wall Street Journal. Watch the Atomic Agency carefully in the coming hours. If the fighting is over, the first thing they will ask for is access to the enriched uranium stockpile, its whereabouts, and whether material has been diverted. Iran will then face a consequential choice. So, what do you think on that, and what could we expect? Do you think if they do have this uranium sort of lying around or hidden, that could be a deal breaker?
I mean, that's kind of hard to say. I don't know if it's a deal breaker per se. I think President Trump is very happy with the strikes. I mean, the question is always back to Israel, and if Israel decides they could do more operations against Iran and vice versa. It's really hard to say. I mean, I don't. I think we're just going to go back to everything that happened prior to this. We'll probably see the Iranian foreign minister fly to Oman or fly to Geneva, Steve Witkoff doing a lot of the negotiations, maybe even Marco Rubio. I think we're going to see a lot more on the diplomatic side. I don't believe there's an appetite in the United States or the West in general to do military operations. Obviously, Benjamin Netanyahu clearly has no problems of reinstituting it. But at the same time, if he were to do a certain type of military operation overtly, it kind of like defeats the purpose of like, well, did we really win, etc. Maybe we see covert operations, maybe a repeat or a return to these shadow wars that used to happen. That's probably the most likely thing. But I don't think there's really an intense likelihood for this. And if there's anything significant that has concern, maybe that's something that even maybe President Trump might say, okay, I made a commitment that I destroyed an Iranian nuclear program, and that hasn't happened.
Mate, yeah, no, I think very much we're in uncharted waters now. We do seem to have yeah, but does it hold? What does this mean for really want to escalate? Because that's putting him more pressure in certain ways. Trump's clearly quite exasperated. I certainly am. I think a lot of us are with the amount we've been holding these daily spaces. We will be doing them intermittently, but only if it, I think, for the time being, if it really gets higher. But we do appreciate everyone for joining us and all the great guests. And, do follow anyone you resonate with. Do check out Mario's account. He's been having a lot of interviews. I have myself. Sitrat's been doing his stuff. So do check out all our work and the great speakers as well, the professionals we have. And drop your comments below. And well, let us know what you want us to host more on, do next time. And well, on that, we will see you all next time.